Hello everybody and welcome to this guide to the RBC add-on. For those of you who do not know, RBC is a physically based vehicle rigging and animation tool for Blender. In this tutorial, I'm going to go over just about every aspect of RBC, so by the end of it, hopefully you'll have a much better understanding on how to use this tool and create some amazing physically based animations. Just a quick note before we get started, some of the features are using RBC Pro 1.41. There are a couple fixes and a little feature adds from 4.0 to 4.1, so just make sure that you're updated when you're following along. All right, let's go ahead and install RBC. Go to Preferences. We're going to install a new add-on. Install from disk. Install the version that you want. They are labeled, so 1.4 will be for Blender 4.0 and up. So just make sure to disable the beta version or the free version before enabling the pro version. Sometimes Blender can get confused if you have both of them enabled. So once you have that enabled, you'll find RBC down here in the panels. We have the Assets panel. These are low poly 3D models provided by Production Crate. They have a lot of great 3D models that you can check out on their website. These are already pre-rigged vehicles with RBC, so we can go ahead and select one, import vehicle, and we already have a scene set up and we are good to go. So you can either import the vehicle to the center or import your vehicle to the cursor. Okay, let's go to rigging. These are the presets of the vehicle types you can have: car, motorcycle, truck, semi-truck, or your custom presets. So this will just import the pieces and then you'll set up and rig according to the model that you're using. So you can come into the customs panel and this will give you all your options to customize a rig. We have some motorcycle features. This includes handlebars, shocks or forks, and a swing arm suspension. You have your front axles and back axles. So you can either choose between 1 or 2 wheels per axle. You can also add a vehicle bed. This essentially splits the body into 2 parts, and then your front axle wheels will be tied to your front body part, and then the back axle wheels will be tied to the back. So this can add flex in between the bodies, but this also opened up an opportunity to do articulating steering. You can have the steering come from the middle instead of the wheels. And then on top of that, we have extra back wheels. You can add as many axles up to 10, and then the wheels, how many wheels you want on each axle. We can do multiple trailers now, and how many axles are on that trailer you can choose. And then down here, you have your preview so that you can actually see what you're doing. So you have your default presets here. You can reset them or duplicate them to create your own. You can change the icon here to fit the category that you want. So you just want to press the plus button to create your own, and this will open up a directory, and this is the place that you want to save all your presets. So you just want to pick out a place and put that and press OK. And so now once you save your blend file, all your presets will be saved here. So we can go ahead and name this car plus trailer. So we have a car plus a trailer. And so now once we save our scene and then come back in, we can find it in our presets panel. And then quick rig, this is a way to bypass the adding the rigs and setup process. There are some restrictions, so you can follow these instructions down here. You must have at least 3 objects selected, and the vehicle must be aligned on the negative y-axis. So you can come in here and either press 1 on your notepad and then make sure that the lights are facing towards you, or up here, just make sure that your vehicle is aligned pointing towards the negative y-axis here. Another thing, it only works on complete objects. Collections aren't supported, and it's just for a basic car vehicle with multiple wheels. So it's super simple. All you have to do is select all your objects, press quick rig, and then it will set up and generate a rig for you. And this was a feature request from somebody. They had a lot of car rigs and they needed a solution to quickly convert these over. So I thought that was a great idea. So you can go ahead and select your car rig and then press the convert to RBC button. And that will just delete the rig and convert it over to RBC. And then you can also select multiple rigs at the same time and then convert them. Okay, let's go over the RBC Scene tab. Number 1, we have Scene. This controls the rigid body simulation, performance, and stability. Just some quick little presets here. Just to catch you up, sub steps per frame is the number of steps between each frame. More accurate, but slower. And then the solver iterations, this is for the constraints of the vehicle. Essentially the same thing. Higher is more accurate, but slower. And then split and pulse, if 2 objects are intersecting, it slows down the separation so that the objects don't go flying out of space. For example, you see your wheels are intersecting, and then it pops up. If you enable split impulse, there's much less pop. Underneath that, we have the ground collection. This is a very important feature for 1.4. The RBC object is going to be a collection of all the objects inside the ground collection. So you're gonna always want to have the RBC ground collection and the RBC ground object in order to use certain features within RBC. So if you do not have these, you'll be prompted to make one, or if it's missing, you can go ahead and add it in. Next, we have the collection. This is going to be a collection of all the rigs in your scene. You have this hide icon. This will hide the armature, or for example, if you have your constraints shown here and you want to quickly hide them all, you can hide and then unhide, and that will hide all your constraints. We have the auto select, so you can click the car icon here and set your viewport to the selected rig. We have your name, so you can rename this to whatever you want. We have the duplicate button, which will duplicate an exact copy of your rig. You're going to want to do this instead of just Shift D because it will not duplicate all your objects or properties and it will not show up there. So use the duplicate button if you want to duplicate a RBC rig. Next, we have the delete button. This will delete the rig from your scene. It's important to do that instead of just deleting the armature rig because it will still show up. Just keep that in mind if you want to duplicate or delete the rig, to do it with these buttons. And also for the collection tab, this is where we're able to add in RBC rigs from other blend files. We can append the collection that they are created in. So you can do that by going up here to append, find your blend file, and then go into your collections and then append the collection. And so once you do that, inside the collection tab here, you'll see a refresh collection. You also see the refresh button up here in your RBC scene. So you can go ahead and press the refresh collection, and that will add your RBC rig into your current scene here. To further explain the structure that RBC works within, you have the RBC Addon collection. This is the collection of all the RBC objects. You'll have your RBC ground collection. This is a collection of all the objects that you want your wheels to be interacting with. It's helpful for geometry nodes and getting the collision contact. And then we have the RBC rig collection. This holds your rig and all the objects. And then you have a couple of default cameras. So we have the follow camera, which will just follow your vehicle around your scene. And then we have the chase cam, which will be attached to the vehicle. Underneath that, we have the RB ground. This is for some of the physics constraints here because they have to be tied down to an object. So just make sure that is not deleted or changed. If you do delete it on accident, you can come up here to the scene and you go ahead and add that back in. Moving on, we have the statistics. So I'll go ahead and enable some of these and explain what they are. We'll go ahead and run the statistics overlay. We have the speed of the vehicle, the slip ratio of the wheels, the wheel contact, and once we get moving, you will see the wheel velocity. We have some extra parameters like engine stats. Right now we're using the basic model, but if we switch over to advanced, you can see we have all of our engine stats. Just to show you an example of how these are useful, if we press play, we can see that our vehicle drives up onto this object. You can see that our wheels lose contact. And that is because object is not set inside the ground collection object. Once we set that object inside there, our vehicle is detecting that as the ground. So let me go ahead and take you through the rigging process for RBC. Thought it'd be fun to bring it back to the OG Porsche I had in my first tutorial. So let's download that and bring it into Blender. The first thing we're going to want to do is to clean up the model. Generally, just keeping it into single objects is the best way to go about this. So let's go ahead and show you a few tips on how to join these all together. You can see that our wheels here are single objects other than this. So a simple way to join objects is to select the objects that you want to join and just click Ctrl J. It'll join all the objects selected into a single object. I'm going to delete this bottom plane because we don't need it. Just going to shift select and hide these so that we can select all of our objects here. Ctrl J, or you can go up to here, object, join. And so you're going to want to join all the objects that are the solid part of the vehicle. So you can see this antenna here. We could keep, but I want to go ahead and separate this and go to edit mode and select by box selecting. Then Control L will select all the parts that are linked to it, and then P for separate, and we're going to separate by selection. So it's just very simple editing techniques to help you get started. You can see that the front wheels are rotated, which we do want to correct. I'm going to rotate these so that they are facing forward, and you're also going to want to make sure your wheels are lined up on the bottom so that they are not unaligned, and so that your physics rig is not unaligned. All right, so once you have your objects separated, ready to go, make sure that you are aligned on the y-axis. You can press 1 on your notepad and make sure you see the headlights, or you can go up here, make sure that's facing on the y-axis towards the negative here. I'm going to add the car rig. Just press add rig, go to RBC Rig. This is where you're going to set up and control your vehicle. Let's go ahead and rename this Porsche. Now before I rig, I just want to double check the scale. I forgot to mention this, but this is a physics rig, so matching our vehicle to its scale in real life will give the best results. I'm going to find the size of the Porsche, which is about 4.29 meters. Just going to scale it down to something close to the original so we have a more accurate simulation. All right, now that you have it scaled down, select the body of our car model and click vehicle body. Select the front left wheel and then click the front left button. So let's go ahead and link the back left. So this stands for front left, front right, back left, back right. Select on this side, front right. Select the back right wheel, back right. You could already see that the physics rig is adapting to your car model. It might be hard, but you can kind of see the cylinders around this wheel. So that's a good way to tell if anything is messed up, because it is going to surround the mesh of your object. So if you missed a vertice, which has happened before, if you missed a vertice or something and it's way off out here, let's go ahead and deselect this and then select our wheel. You can notice that our wheel is all wonky because it's actually detecting that extra vertice. But if you have anything that doesn't quite match up before generating the rig, investigate and try to find out what the issue is. So I'm going to delete that and then reapply this, and you see that it's back to normal. And at the top here, you can see we have the axles. So you can enable that and decide your axles before you rig. We can also set this up after in the tuning panel. Collections, this is if you want to use collections instead of objects. To do that would be if all your wheel objects are in a collection, select the front left folder, and then it will apply to all the objects in that folder. So you want to make sure that collections, all those objects in that collection. So you're going to want to make sure that your objects are separated correctly. We also have brakes. This is your brake calipers, or it can be extra objects. So you just select your brake caliper object and then click your plus button, and this will add a constraint. So it follows along with your wheel, but does not rotate along the x-axis. Once you have it all set up, click generate rig, and this will generate your physics rig. So tuning is where you can tune basically anything to do with your physics rig. We have the presets, which comes with 4 default presets. You could also create your own. So you can just press this plus button to create your own tuning presets, duplicate your presets, or delete them. You can't delete the default presets, you can just reset them, but you can save them to your liking. To save your presets, you can just Control S and save your blend file, and then it'll save them. Or when you switch between them, that'll also save them. And then right up here, we have your preview menu, select all, which selects all the wheels and body parts that you have. And then it'll apply to each wheel in the rig, or individual, where you can tune individual axles or even individual wheels. Basically how it works, you just select the axle that you want to work with, the front or back axle. And then in the axle that you're tuning, you can deselect and select whichever wheel you want to tune. So let's go ahead and leave that select all, come down to here to wheels, the pivot point. This is the point at which your wheel will pivot around. Click this eye icon down here, and this will show you the physics constraint. Most cases, leaving it in the middle will be just fine, but you can offset it just a bit on the inside. So it's just an extra measure to fine tune. And then you don't want to move them around because it will rotate around the x-axis. So if this is offset, then your wheels will rotate at an offset angle. So you're going to want to keep this exactly in the middle and only offset on the x-axis. And then you have the quick reset button on the right side. Steering angle, this is how far your wheels can turn. So 35 is a good default. You can also bring it up to 90 if you need to. But you'll notice once you change it and press play, it doesn't change automatically. That is because when dealing with rigid body constraints, you need to reset the timeline, press play, and then the constraint will reset. So it's good practice to shift left arrow, and that'll reset it, or come down here to jump to the endpoint, and that will reset it. But I'm going to go ahead and leave this at 35, then come down here to camber angle. Camber angle, this is essentially the tilt angle of your wheels. This does not affect the actual physics, but if you have like a drift car or something, it adds a nice little flair to it. Tire friction, this is the friction of your tires. So if you do 0 friction, your physics rig will not move. You can increase or decrease this however much you want. And then the rolling resistance, this is the rolling resistance of your wheels. This is how long will it take for your wheels to come to a complete stop. Essentially, the higher number that is, the faster you will come to a complete stop. Let's just leave that at the default value and then show you the new tire physics we have. To enable tire physics, go ahead and add the tire physics to it. You'll notice right off the bat issues with the tire, but I'll show you how to correct that in a minute. Tire physics does slow down the simulation quite a bit. I believe this is due to the geometry nodes. If you disable it, you'll get faster speeds. So the way that tire physics works is it separates the wheel into 2 objects, the wheel and the tire, held together by a spring constraint, which under heavy loads require a lot more iterations. If you're not getting the result you want, you may want to increase the sub-steps. If your substeps are really low, the wheels become unstable. And the higher you increase this, the stronger the constraint becomes. So the rim size is exactly that, the rim size that you have. So you can just scale it down to the model that you have. Tire pressure is the pressure of the tire. It's essentially just scales the outer tire up and down. If you want to deflate the tires, I recommend you use the tire pressure instead of the PSI, because this is the strength of the spring. So if the spring is not strong enough, then the wheels will fly everywhere. So just keep a fixed PSI and then control the tire pressure. Moving on to geometry, we're going to go ahead and unhide this so that we can deform our tire mesh. Select this and you can see that our edges right here are not actually merged together. So it is dependent on your tire mesh. A quick way to resolve this is to go into edit mode and select M to merge by distance, and this will merge all your vertices together, and that fixed our outer tire. You can see that our rim here is still not connected, which is why we have a separate geometry rim size. So we go ahead and scale this down or up just to connect these two meshes. And then this is a link if you want to link the rim size with the geometry. Now we have our rim size. Next we have the tire deflection, and this is basically the displacement of the tire. Ground offset if you want to offset from your ground, and then correct smooth. This is helpful for certain tires, especially if they have very thick tread. Applying this will preserve the detail a bit and give you a better looking result. You have the cage mesh. This is for the geometry node setup. Essentially, a cage mesh surrounds your entire wheel model that will be displaced. So you have two modes to choose through, simple or surface. Simple is just a simple cylinder that surrounds your tire, and then surface will actually shrink wrap to your tire, and then you can increase or decrease the resolution right here. One thing to note, if you do have corrective smoothing and the cage mesh enabled, your corrective smoothing will not be shown because the vertex count doesn't match. So just a small thing to be aware of. And then underneath the tires, we have the wheel collider section. So you can change the size, and if you unsync this, you can individually change the height, or you can change the width. Then underneath the size, we have the bevel. So you can actually bevel the edges of this cylinder collider, so you can get a much more accurate collision detection. For the motorcycles, this is very helpful for the tilting feature. Before, you can see the tilt was just on these flat basic cylinders. So now we can bevel the edges to get a much more accurate result for our tires. So just a note for the collider bevel, if we do increase the bevel, we do not want these bevels to oversect, because if we do have them oversect, the collision boundaries oversect, and then you get an unstable result. So just be mindful of that and only bevel what you really need. Underneath the bevel, we have the collider tolerance and the collider samples. This is more to detect if the collider is touching the RBC ground. So the collider tolerance is basically the distance between your wheel and the ground. You can kind of think of it as a radius here. So you see we set it at 0.034. And if we go along, and as soon as it hits inside this boundary, it detects a contact point. And then the collider samples are the number of rays that are being emitted. So the higher the number, the more likely you are to detect a hit. Let's move on to the suspension. So here we have the suspension limits. So this is the limits of your suspension. Let's go ahead and disable the spring stiffness to show you. And the spring limits is one that you do have to reset every time you change it. So if we have no spring stiffness, our body from our tires will drop down 1 meter. If we have it at 0, it'll drop down 0. So you can fine tune this basically to just so your wheels don't poke through. You just have to debug a bit to figure out what looks good. I think 2.5 looks good for this rig here. And then the spring stiffness is the stiffness of your suspension. If we have super springy suspension with 0 dampening, our rig will basically bounce forever. And the dampening brings it to a stop. Okay, let's go over the drivetrain next. So we have a few presets here for the drivetrain. You have 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, front-wheel drive, differential steering drive, rear-wheel steering drive, and then you have front-wheel steering and rear-wheel steering. For the drivetrain, you do have to reset the timeline in order for it to work correctly, because you have to reset the constraints. So just make sure to reset the timeline every time you change that. So we'll go over the first one. 2-wheel drive is your standard 2-wheel drive. Your back wheels are powered and your front wheels steer the vehicle. And then you have 4-wheel drive, where both the front and back axles are powered. And then we have the front wheel drive, where just your front wheels are powered. Differential steering, let's go ahead and reset this. Differential steering, just like skid steering, where the wheels spin opposite of one another. And then for the differential intensity, it controls how much one wheel spins over the other. And then we have rear wheel steering. This is where your front wheel drive and then your back wheels will steer. And then you have front and back wheel steering, where both your front wheels will drive and steer at the same time. So these are just some defaults to get you started. You can also go into the individual tab where you have access to the axle type, where you can really customize it to your liking. So we have a few axle types. You have drive, steering, plus steering, dead, or differential. If your axle type is drive, then your wheels are only powered. If your axle type is steering, then your wheels only steer. If they're both, they're combined. And then if they're dead, they do nothing. They're basically just like trailer wheels. They just roll along with whatever. You can also enable the brakes for these. Differential steering, like I said before, your wheels will rotate in opposite directions. So for your drive axle type, you have 3 different differential types: open, locked, or limited slip. So you see with a locked differential, your wheels spin at the same rate, but with an open differential, the outer wheel actually spins faster, reducing slip. And then a limited slip is the combination of both of these. So you can find your in-between here. And then underneath that, we have the reverse drive to reverse the drive if you need to. For the steering axle type, you have 3 steering types: parallel, Ackerman, or anti-Ackerman. Ackerman's standard for most vehicles, but we can change it to parallel. And that's where our wheels can turn at the same exact degree. And then Ackerman, our wheels turn at different radiuses to reduce the skidding of the inner wheel. And then anti-Ackerman is just the opposite of Ackerman. You also have the ability to reverse your steering if you need to. And some things to note with the parallel steering here: if we go ahead and drive in a circle and then we enable traction control, you see our vehicle starts to slow down. That's because traction control controls the lateral slip of our wheels. Since they're at the same exact angle, it's having a little trouble overpowering that. You can either decrease this to find what you're looking for, or stick with Ackerman steering if you're using traction control. That way your vehicle is not affected by this. And then you can also see if you have anti-Ackerman plus traction control, you can really notice this issue. Another thing to be mindful of is the differential steering uses the default tire friction model, so traction control will not work with it either. That's because, again, we're controlling the lateral slip of our wheels, so it just doesn't work in this case. Another thing is, since it is friction-based, we need a certain amount of torque in order to overcome it. So if our torque is really low, we have to increase it in order to get our wheels to slip. All right, let's move on to body. First, weight. This is your overall weight of the vehicle, so you can match this exactly if you want. The weight ratio, this is something that kind of has to do with the physics engine. This defines the weight between your body and your wheels. Your wheels will receive this percentage of the total weight. The way it's set up is using a spring constraint, and this constraint is based on weight. So if you have a heavier object pressing down on a lighter object, it can create some issues if your sub-steps aren't high enough. So if we have a low sub-step, it just becomes unstable if it does match real-world values. So you can try increasing it to stabilize it a bit, or you can increase this weight ratio. That also strengthens the suspension springs. Moving on, we have the set position. So we can set the weight distribution of our vehicle. So we can move this back, go ahead and confirm. You can notice that the weight is sitting in the back of our vehicle, and then resetting it, we'll reset it to the default center of gravity. So you just want to be careful if you are offset, the weight will be distributed on the left there. So just be careful with that feature. And then always confirm before proceeding, just to avoid any issues. Below that, we have the edit body collision. So this is where we can actually define the collision shape of our vehicle's body. Let's go ahead and edit that. So we have mesh, full transparency. Blender's mesh collision is finicky sometimes. So if you want a more stable collision, you can use the convex hull. So just to demonstrate this better, let's show what a ball does colliding with it. Boom, bop, bam. So our ball does not actually collide with the windshield because it's colliding with our outer perimeter. Change it to mesh and then confirm. And then you can now see we have a nice little shrink wrap mesh, much better resembling the shape of our model. The mesh collision type is rather computer intensive. So this decimate is at a very small number. You don't need this much detail. If you do have it, your simulation will become incredibly slow. So let's go ahead and just leave this at a smaller number, and our speeds are much better. And then also in the body section, this is where you can find your motorcycle settings and your hitch settings. So after you set up your motorcycle and you generate your rig, you'll be prompted to go into the body section where you'll have these extra motorcycle settings. This part is crucial for finalizing the process for the motorcycle setup. So you have 2 settings, your handlebar tilt and your set swing arm. The handlebar tilt value is to align your front shock suspension with your handlebars. So we can go ahead and enable this eye icon to pull up the handlebar constraint, and then we can align this along the handlebars. And you're not going to want to rotate the constraint because this value does not only align your handlebar constraint, it also aligns your wheel constraint. So you want these two to align in order for your front shock suspension to align correctly. So this is what the shock suspension will look like if you do not have your handlebar tilt set, and this is what it looks like when you do. And then after that, you're going to want to set the swing arm constraint. So this is the origin at which your swing arm will rotate around. So you're going to want to set this to the hinge joint. That way your swing arm will swing around the correct point. So 2 crucial steps for the motorcycle setup process. Then we have the hitch settings. So a bed hitch and a trailer hitch are essentially the same thing. You have the set position. So you can set the position of the hitch here, and then you can align it to whatever position you need, and then just confirm that position. And then you have the angular limits here for the X, Y, or Z axis, and then you can set each angle limit individually below them. And then you have the articulating steering. So this is for the loaders or any vehicle that you want to steer from the hitch position. So once you enable that, the steering will now come from the center. If your front wheels are still steering, you can go into the individual tab and then go to the axle and then set this to a correct axle type, come back in, reset, and your front wheels will be fixed. And then you can control the articulating steering angle below it. So this would be just like your steering angle for your tires, only now just for your steering hitch. Let's move on to the engine tab. Here we have either a basic or an advanced engine. For the basic engine type, you basically have a speed and a torque to get to that speed. You can decrease the torque if you want the vehicle to gradually move up to that speed, or you can increase it so that it quickly reaches that speed. Next, we have the advanced engine. Here you have total control over the actual engine specs and engine behavior that will eventually lead to your speed outcome. So you have a few presets here. You have economy, sports, off-road, drift presets, all kind of resembling the generic engine of that type. And then you can also create your own engine type, duplicate, delete them. So first off, we have the torque curve. This is a graph that shows the engine's torque across different RPMs. You see, this is our max RPM, and this will be our max torque. This does control the max torque of your graph here. So your max torque, if you're using the curve, will actually be represented down here. So just be mindful of that if you want specifics. So your top gear, drive ratio, your different gears down here, and then the gear ratios below them. So the values highlighted in red, those are just for show. What you want to do is use these instead. You can choose your max RPM and then what your torque will be at each RPM here. And the same here for the gear ratios, you can change them underneath them. So if you're not familiar with how engines work, that's okay. I am not either. Basically just Google a lot of this. A little overview here of the max RPM is the max engine RPM. The max torque is the maximum torque available on the torque graph. The top gear is the highest gear available in the vehicle transmission and determines the total number of gears that the vehicle has. The drive ratio affects the overall gearing of the vehicle. It's typically the final drive ratio, which is the gear ratio between the transmission and the wheels. A higher drive ratio provides more torque at the wheels but reduces the speed, while a lower ratio does the opposite. The gear ratios determine how the engine speed is converted to the wheel speed. Lower gears with higher numbers provide more torque for acceleration, while higher gears with lower numbers allow for higher top speeds. So if you really don't know, like I don't, just Google your engine parameters and then plug them in. And then underneath the engine specs, we have the engine behavior. It's more to customize the simulation part of the engine, but you can change your transmission type from automatic to manual here. So you can choose at which RPM the next gear should shift up, and then what RPM the next gear should shift down. You have your idle RPM. If you want your engine to power up quickly, you can increase the RPM speed here and play around with the RPM increments up and down values. And they can also add a little noise to the RPM. So if you want your engine shaking, so if you increase the noise, your vehicle will kind of stutter along. So it can give a cool effect if your vehicle is starting to break down. Underneath that, we have 2 toggles: reset engine on first frame and auto throttle. So reset on the first frame, if you have this enabled, basically your RPM just reset down to 0 on your first frame. And then auto throttle converts your throttle here to a speed. That way you just set your speed that you want to reach, and then your vehicle will automatically do all the work for you. And then in manual, like it says, you shift up manually. So you can go ahead and set that through here, or when you're using the controller and keyboard, you can shift up manually. Next, we have the physics section. In this section, we have a handful of physics controls to better help stabilize or control your physics rig. So first off, we have the downforce. This essentially adds a downforce to your wheels to keep them clamped to the ground. If we play, our wheels have a high friction rate, which cause our vehicle to flip over here. If we wanted to keep these settings and we didn't want to change the friction of the wheels or anything like that, we can go ahead and enable the downward force. Once we play this, you'll notice that our vehicle does not flip over. So you have automatic forces, or if you disable this, you'll have more control over the actual force happening to the wheels. Essentially, it is just a force, velocity, and impulse. The velocity is the speed at which the wheels are being clamped down, and the impulse is how quickly the wheels reach that speed. So you can actually change the force, and this kind of controls the gravity of the vehicle too. And then you also have this pin button here. This pins it to the control panel. That way you can quickly access it. You don't have to switch back and forth. Next up, we have the lean force. This is mainly for motorcycles, but you can also add it to your cars if you like. Some motorcycle rigs will automatically have the lean force enabled. I'm going to just enable this pin to the control tab to demonstrate this. Basically, when your vehicle turns, your vehicle will also lean into that direction. So you can control the angle of the lean here. So currently, the lean strength is synced with the steering strength. So it's the steering power here. So if we have a higher steering power, our lean steering will basically just match it. So if you don't want that, if you want a little more control over the lean and steering, you can disable the sync strength with steering. And in this case, you can now control the lean however you'd like. So if you want the vehicle to lean more than it turns, you can go ahead and disable that and then just tune it to how you like. And then underneath the lean force, we have the traction control. So this essentially controls the lateral and linear velocity of the wheels. So just go ahead and enable the slip ratio and the wheel velocity to help demonstrate what this does. If we enable this, we can see that our wheels are spinning out a lot and our lateral wheel movement is quite a lot. If we enable traction control here, it reduces the lateral slip along with the linear slip. So now our vehicle is driving much more closely to what we are actually controlling here. So if you want exact speeds, exact control, you're going to want to have this enabled. And then for traction control, you can control the strength, and then you can also disable the auto traction control. This will give you more controls. So you have the ability to either enable or disable the lateral friction or the linear friction. So if you want to think of it as the lateral controls the drift of your vehicle and the linear controls the speed of your vehicle. And then underneath that, we have drift control, which is essentially the same thing, only we have more ways to control the actual drift of your vehicle. This is geared more for the guide path. If you're just using regular drivers, the friction from the wheels usually gives you a better drift, but you can also have this enabled and kind of tune it to your liking. So if we go ahead and enable drift control, you see that our vehicle's back end starts to drift. Disable the auto drift and then come into here and we have a few more controls. Front drift controls the drift of the front wheels and the back drift controls the drift of the back wheels. And then we have the drift decay. This just controls the length of the drift. If you increase this, then your drifts will be basically non-existent. So keeping this to a lower value, but not too low to where your back end's constantly drifting out. So it's a bit of a balancing act. You can play around with these parameters to get the drift look that you're looking for. Let's move on to controls. Controls is where you're going to control your vehicle. We have 4 different controls. We have your drivers, controller, keyboard, or guides. The drivers is just your basic controls. Essentially, you have your speed, your torque, and this will change depending on your engine type and your throttle. So if you can see this, we'll have our throttle. So your interface will change depending on your engine type. And then some shortcuts here, reset your speed and disable your speed if you want to troubleshoot some things. Negative value is turn to the left, positive value to the right. And then your steering power is how quickly your wheels will reach that speed. We have your brakes. You can either enable just your front brakes or both your front and back brakes. So if you have none of these enabled, you'll get a little red error, which says, hey, select one, otherwise no brake will work. And then under that, you have your brake strength. You can set this at a very low number if you want the brake strength to be more gradual when it comes to a stop. And then if you want like a hand brake, just increase it all the way and it'll stop essentially immediately. So a very basic way to control your vehicle. Next on the controls, we have the controller. So this way you can control your vehicle with the gamepad controller. It works on most controllers. Controller support is only for Windows at this point. I've looked into trying to integrate it for Mac, but I just don't have a Mac and I'd have to redo all the code. So for now, it's just for Windows. And then hopefully in the future, I can get support for Mac and Linux. Let's go ahead and connect our controller. If you have your controller connected and it still says no controllers detected, go ahead and hover over the panel here, and then it should pop up. If it doesn't, then you might have some connection issues. I know for the PS4 controllers, you will need the DS4 Windows software to maybe convert it into an Xbox controller. But once you have your controller connected, you see you have a controller and the vehicle that you are controlling. You can go ahead and press play and then start controlling your vehicle. So you have your drive settings here, and then some advanced slow-mo settings and all your control maps down here. For the basic engine, you have top speed. This will be the max speed that your vehicle can reach. You also have different controls depending on your engine type. If we have an advanced engine, our controller will work differently. Our trigger will be our throttle, so it'll be like your gas pedal. So once you press that down, it'll go full throttle, and then your vehicle will shift up through the gears. As you can see on the left side, your max speed will be dependent on your engine type or engine specs. So we can also change our engine instead of automatic to a manual engine. So with this, we can shift through the gears ourselves. With the controller, to do that, it's the right bumper and the left bumper. So you can bump up through the gears. This is pretty cool to add a little extra control to your simulations. Another thing we can do is actually switch between different vehicles. By hitting the left or right D-pad, you can switch between controlling different vehicles. You can switch through vehicles. And also we have support for multiple controllers now. So to do that is just to connect another controller. You'll see your second controller pops up. So this is important. You can see that they both have the same vehicle. Once you're running the simulation, make sure to switch the vehicle. That way you're not trying to control the same vehicle. And then in advanced, we have the slow-mo. So this just controls the overall simulation speed. You can enable that by holding down the button A. You can change the speed to whatever. And then again, you can go over the control maps here. And the controls are basically entirely the same for the keyboard here. So W to drive forward, A to steer left, D to steer right. Brake is the space bar, R to reset. Holding the left shift button will put you in slow motion. If you have multiple vehicles, you can use the arrows to switch between your different vehicles. If you are using a manual engine, use Q to shift down or E to shift up. Something to note with the keyboard is once you start the keyboard, you will not be able to move around your scene or interact with it. This is just to avoid shortcuts. So make sure you're set up to view your car always, or you're set up to follow your vehicle. And then to exit, just press escape or right click. Okay, up next we have guides. There's two sections in guides, a guide object or a guide path. So this is for your curves or your path following. And then a guide object is to follow an object. So we can select our guide object here. So we have auto drive, auto reverse, and auto brake here. You can enable this little eye icon, and just to give you a better idea of what's going on here, the wheels will steer and follow this object. You can set the speed, but if your brakes aren't auto brakes aren't enabled or anything, it'll just continuously go. So we turn on auto brakes, we get this perimeter, and once the object reaches inside the perimeter, then the brakes will kick in. And then also we have the auto reverse, which is anything outside this angle right here. We'll reverse the angle of the wheels and the motor, and it'll back up and turn until the object is inside this perimeter. So again, outside, we'll turn, reverse, inside, we'll drive forward. And the auto drive is based on the distance between the car object and the guide object. Okay, and then we have the guide path here. This is where you can select a curve or a path at which you want your vehicle to follow along. You have some path settings here, and then your drive settings, and then traction control down here. And I'll explain that in a minute. So once we have a guide path enabled, our power steering cranks up, and then we enable traction control automatically. This helps us follow the path more correctly because RBC does not constrain the rig to the curve. It actually uses a guiding system. If we go ahead and enable this eye icon, you can see our guiding system. So this is what our vehicle is actually following, not actually being constrained to the curve itself. So we have a few path settings here. The resolution, where you can change the resolution of your curve, and then you have the shrink wrap offset. If this is enabled, this will shrink wrap your curve to the ground, and then you have the offset. So this will offset your shrink wrap. Underneath that, we have the target offset. We can actually offset our target either laterally or horizontally. This could be useful in some cases where you want two cars following the same path. You can offset this target, that way they're not colliding with each other. We have the set rig to path. This will set your rig to the path, and it will attach it to the first point of your curve here. And then for path cyclic, this will make your path a complete circle. Enabling this will keep it continuous. Underneath that, you have your simple drive settings along with your auto features. Auto reverse is the same as with guides. You can enable it, but I wouldn't recommend it sometimes if you do have curves coming in at a sharp angle, it can get confused. So leaving that off will be just fine. And then you have auto drive and auto brake. Once you enable auto drive, this will actually give you a curved base speed. So you can actually envision this as the point at the start of your curve and then at the end of your curve. So you can manipulate the speed at the curve point. For auto drive, I would recommend that you have the basic engine and traction control enabled, and that will help give you a more accurate result of the auto drive curve here. And then another little issue here, you'll see that our vehicle, when it doesn't come to a complete stop, and then you see our wheels start to flicker a little bit. But that's just because the target's actually behind the wheels, so it's getting a little confused there. Some ways to combat that is to either A, enable the auto brake, in which case you have this radius around the endpoint here, which will help it come to a complete stop, or you can use the auto drive curve and bring this down here in the corner a little bit more, and that will also ease the speed down. Okay, next up we have the animation panel. So this is where you can save and record your animations. We have the same collection options, and then underneath we have the animation tab and the export tab. So let's go over the animation tab first. I'll go ahead and pin this to the control here. That way we have it all in one area. So there's two types of recording you can do. You can either record by cache or keyframe. You have your scene memory, or you can add a new scene cache. This will actually save it to your hard drive. That way you can switch between different takes here. Essentially how it works is you click record and it'll automatically play. You can drive around your scene here. And then once you like it, you can press stop. Now all your movements will be saved. Down here, you have 135 frames recorded out of 1500. So to give you how many frames have been recorded. And then you have this little delete button over here, and this will delete the current cache that you have. Underneath that, we have the pre-bake frames option. This is pretty helpful for cases like our suspension here. In the beginning, our suspension settles, and there's kind of no real way around that because you have to run the simulation for it to settle. So this is helpful for that. You could just run a few seconds ahead, and then our suspension will be settled, and then we can go ahead and record our scene. So it's a pretty helpful feature for certain cases like that. Once we do have our cache saved, we have the bake to keyframe button. Then this will bake your movements to keyframes now that you can use. And then also next to it, we have this record all buttons. And so this will bake all your rigs in your scene to keyframes. And then we have our timeline section here. So we set the cache start frame or the cache end frame. You have this little sync button. So this will actually sync it to your timeline down here. So whatever your timeline is at will be what your scene can record. You have this play button and this continue to record button here. This is all on by default. The reason why I kept this able to disable is for use cases like the controller and the keyboard. For example, the keyboard is locked in once you start it. So if you have to quickly start it, it's kind of annoying to record it like that. So you can disable the autoplay, and then once you hit record, it'll just stay stationary, and then you can go ahead and play out your scene now. And then once you escape, it'll stop. Go ahead and just double check that it's off, and then your animation should be good for playback. And then underneath we have the continue to play. So this will start at the last cached frame. So if you go ahead, record cache, and then it'll click it to your last frame. Go ahead and press start again, and then you can be on your merry way. This does come off with a little caveat. I try to get around this, but if you reset your timeline to 0 and you touch 0 down here, then when you start your simulation again, it will reset objects to the beginning. This is because this is how Blender's cache system works. Once you reset to the first frame, it resets everything, which is really annoying. To avert that, when you're scrubbing on your timeline, after you record it, do not hit 0. And then underneath that, we have some shortcuts for the play and the reset button. So one of the limitations of the rigid body cache system is that it saves all the rigid body objects all in one. So if we like the movement of this car, but we don't like the movement of that car, there's not really a way to separate that individually. And so that's where you have to keyframe the movements. You can either bake the keyframes to one car and then reset the cache. So your one car will be baked, and then you can tune the other car. And then we have keyframe animation. This is where you can actually live keyframe the movement of your vehicle instead of relying on the cache there. So now all our movements are keyframed. You can add multiple takes. This is where all your animations will be saved. So you can switch between these to choose your favorite take, and then you have the ability to duplicate or delete them. So it works similar to the cache, only it's with keyframes. So you can delete the keyframes with the X here. And then underneath that, you have a display for how many keyframes have been keyframed so far. And then we have the check mark. This is a pretty important button here. If we open up our curve graph, you'll notice that our wheels, you have this flipping here. This keyframe not only confirms that the animation is complete, it also cleans the curves. You're going to want to enable this for your final animation because this also gets rid of some motion blur issues that can happen during the rendering process. Underneath that, we have the same timeline and playback button as we did for the cache. Okay, and then once you have your animation keyframed, you can now utilize our next tab here, the export tab. So it's pretty quick export options here. You have what you want to export. You can either export the active rig. If you have multiple rigs, you can export all of them, or you can export your full scene to FBX. Underneath that, you have the set to origin. This is helpful for things like Unreal Engine. You're going to want to reset the origin before you export. That way it's at the center when you import it to Unreal. And then underneath that, we have the file export. So you just choose a location to where you want to export and then just click export. And then the name of your export will be the name of your action up here. All right, let's go over collisions. If you're new to rigid body physics or you need a quick overview, active collisions for the objects that you want to move around. A passive collision would be like the ground or something that is stationary. And then you have a clear button if you want to remove the active or passive collision. Once your object does have a collision, you have your collision settings down here. First, we have the link the object to the ground collection. Again, this is for detecting a collision hit for the contact wheels. And then you have some rigid body settings underneath. You can influence the mass, set it to dynamic. Dynamic just means that it actually has physics applied to it. If you want to keyframe or move around an object inside the simulation, just have animated enabled, and then you'll be able to do so. Underneath that, you have the collision shape. I'll go over the collision shapes in an example later, but the default is by convex hull. Next to the convex hull, we have this eye icon, and this will actually give you the true collision shape of your object. So this is helpful for objects that have concave parts. This will just show you the true collision that you're actually getting in your simulation. And then you have your different collision types down here. Probably the most complicated one would be the mesh, which again is a little unstable. But if we go ahead and enable mesh, we have a subcategory down here, and that is the source. For example, if we had a subsurface modifier applied to it, we are still only detecting the base mesh. So if you want to get a final result with all your modifiers applied, you can change the source to final. And then once we do that, our collision will be accurate according to the modifiers. But again, this does cost a bit of performance the higher the vertice count. And then underneath that, we have some self-explanatory settings, friction, and the bounciness of the object. And then also the margin, which is like an invisible barrier around your object. And then below that, we have the copy from active so that you can select an active object and then copy the settings to your selected objects. Ghost bodies is just something I call rigid body objects that aren't in your scene but are still affecting it. All the rigid body objects are put into a collection, and that collection is in the background in Blender and not necessarily what's in your view layer. I found that ghost bodies appear if you delete the collection they're in. You'll see here they deleted from our viewport, but it still is affecting our rigid bodies. And that is because they are still in the rigid body world collection and not in our scene collection. This isn't technically a bug, it's just how Blender utilizes the rigid body physics. So you can see here that our two objects popped up in this ghost bodies panel. This lets you know if there are any ghost body objects. So you have the option to either unlink it or delete it entirely. Make sure you have an object selected and then just unlink it. It'll unlink from the rigid body collection and then you'll be good to go. Delete all ghost bodies to get rid of them all. So it's just another thing to be mindful of. So let's say you import this road plane here and you want it to be your ground. Go ahead and make it a passive collision. This means it will not move around. And you'll notice this phenomenon called the convex hull. Essentially, once you make a rigid body object, the default is the convex hull. So you can see the collision shape down here. I can enable this eye icon and it's a little difficult to see here, but I can see we're floating actually above the mesh. So this is a good default for a performance thing, but not particularly for any concave objects like this road. So we have these edges on this road. So what we can do here in the settings is just change this to mesh. And then you see now we're not above the curb here. So you can see that we're still a little above the plane because our margin's at 4. So we reduce that to 0.1 and we're basically touching the ground there. Let's see if we enable this to be animated. Bring this up a bit. So I have our vehicle aligned to a nerves path. And now I'm going to add an array modifier and fit it to that curve, just nerves path, and then decide which way you want it to array, which we want it to be the negative y-axis. You can see it's following our curve. It's following the length of our curve and not our actual curve. Add a curve modifier to this, add it to the nerves path, and we want this to be on the negative y-axis. So now our road will follow our curve. So once we have an array and curve set up, we can go ahead and press play, and you'll see the car falls through the road. Now, why is that? Because our mesh source is still on deform, which means only deform modifiers or shapes keys will be detected. So just the actual mesh is what's being detected here. Go ahead and change the source to final, and this will take into consideration all of your modifiers, and then you should be good to go after that. All right, let's go over the FX tab. So we have tire marks or tire smoke. I do recommend that you have your animation baked before. You can play around with it if it's not baked, but it's good to finalize your animation before adding these effects. So we'll go over tire marks first. We're just going to add tire marks. You'll see in our outliner here, we have a new effects collection and then a collection for the wheels. We can go ahead and press play, and we can see that we have tire marks coming in. So first on the list, we have the geometry, so you can actually change the resolution of this geometry. This is helpful if you're shrink wrapped to the ground. And then we have the ground offset. This is going to offset your mesh from the ground. You also have a shrink wrap button, which will shrink wrap to the ground object. So since it is a geometry on geometry, you get this clipping issue. So you can either offset this, or if you want it as flat as can be, you can go into view and just increase the clipping. Increasing this will get rid of that little jittering effect. And then also the cameras do have their own clipping, so you want to play around with those values. But the material is really where this shines. First off, we have the image, so we can actually add an image texture to this geometry. Our tires actually come with a texture, and then we can grab the tread from that texture, so it makes an exact skid mark for our tires here. So let's add that in. Just select tire track, and you can see we get the tire track. Come down here, we have the opacity. That changes the alpha or the opacity of the skid mark. And then we have the image to noise. So this will just mix a noise texture with your image texture. If you don't have an image texture, this is also just a good basic starting point for your skid mark. And then we have the pressure. This will actually take the pressure from your wheels. In this case, it's not showing much. Under that, we have the slip ratio. The slip ratio is basically the slip of the tire. We can see that our back tires are skidding out more because those are the ones that are in drive. So they're skidding out more, leaving a tire effect. So you can play around with this value here. And then if you want even more, you can increase this by just clicking the number that you want. So these values can be increased beyond the default here. Underneath slip ratio, we have the slip angle, and this will get the slip angle of the tires. If we increase this, it gets a little darker. So it's just another value you can add onto there. And then underneath that, we have the edges. This is important for a couple of reasons. One, that smooths out the edges of the tire marks. And also for the slip angle, it decreases the width. And then we have the bake cache. So you can click that, and then your geometry nodes simulation will bake. You also have this double car button for all the cars. So if you have multiple rigs with tire marks, you can go ahead and enable this, and this will bake all of it in one go. And then on top of that, if we go to our materials, you can see we have our node group here with a few extra parameters that you can look through to customize your skid mark a bit more. Moving on to tire smoke. Let's go ahead and enable tire smoke here. In the smoke tab, we have the smoke domain, smoke emitters, and smoke colliders. We go ahead and disable smoke colliders for now, just because smoke colliders does cost a bit of performance. So let's go over smoke domain here. So anything within this is where the smoke will be generated. We have this hide icon. This will just disable the smoke modifier. And then we have the smoke domain object. I left this open so you can change the smoke domain for different vehicles if you want. So we just have some scaling parameters underneath there. You can scale on the X, Y, or Z. Or you can enable this to scale both the X and Z at the same time. So I'm just going to scale this and position it around our scene here. So just to cover the RBC smoke domain, we just have a small geometry node set here for the scaling and the actual smoke simulation modifier here, which there are a lot more parameters that you can go through and customize. If we push play, we don't actually see any smoke. That's because of the cache type that it is. We go ahead and set this as replay, and this will replay in our timeline instead of having to bake it. I'm going to switch over to cycles so we can actually see the smoke. Coming back to the smoke domain, the resolution is the resolution of the domain. You can increase this for higher detail. Dissolve time will dissolve your smoke after a certain amount of frames. Right now it's up to 48 frames, but we do have slow enabled. So this just keeps it in the air a little bit longer. If you want like exact frame time, you can go ahead and disable that. Next, we have noise. We'll enable the noise. This just adds an extra level of detail to it. We have a few parameters. We have the up-res factor and the scale. So you can up-res this factor or you can increase the scale. And this is basically increasing the scale of the noise. Higher values will be larger vorticities of smoke. Underneath that, we have the cache directory folder. Smoke simulation come in very large files. So Blender just bakes this to your hard drive. You just want to make sure you have a set directory so you do not lose your smoke simulation. And then again, this is the cache type underneath here. You have replay, modular, and all. Replay will play in the timeline. Modular, you can bake the base smoke simulation first and then bake the noise smoke simulation after it, or all, you can bake it all together in one go. I recommend all. I have had issues with the replay, but right now it's working pretty well. So let's move on to the smoke emitters. So we have a smoke emitter for each one of our wheels here. So you can either have all the wheels emitting smoke or just the drive wheels. Then you have the flow substeps. If you're running at higher speeds, you may want to increase this so you get a more accurate smoke emission. We have our wheel slip. It'll actually get the slip of your wheel and then apply it to the density. We can increase the wheel velocity. You can see that our wheels will shoot out the smoke at a much higher rate because it's taking the initial velocity of the wheel emitter and projectiling it out behind the wheel. So these are basically just multipliers of the slip ratio and the slip velocity being applied to the smoke emitter. I'll just show you an example with it enabled and disabled. So this is what your smoke will look like. It'll just be like a trail of smoke if you do not have your velocity or a smoke collider. And then this is with it enabled. At a very high speed, it'll shoot the smoke out behind it. So you can play around this value to get whatever kind of look you were going for. Okay, moving on to Smoke Collider. This adds a collider object. This does come at a high performance cost. You can see already that it's going to be hard to even play in real time. So low poly is going to be super simple cylinders and then your beige body mesh. High poly will actually grab your 3D model that you're using, and then collider substeps to increase the accuracy of the smoke colliding. Sometimes a smoke collider does have issues with some objects where the actual body object will carry the smoke along with it. So you can play around with the objects inside the smoke colliders collection. You could remove or add your own in there. I'm going to go ahead and leave that disabled just for performance, and then we'll move on to material. So you have your basic color. You can change the color of your smoke, and then we have the density, which is going to be the density of your smoke. Under density, we have the anisotropy. I'm not 100% sure what this is, but it does change the shape of your smoke. So it's just a nice little parameter to have. And since we're using the volume shader for our smoke, some extra things to be aware of is the actual light bounces. So you can come in here and see the light baths. The volume is set at 0 because rendering the volume is quite GPU intensive. So increase this to 12. You can see that our smoke is more resembling the actual color that we set. Underneath material, we have the bake settings. You can choose your frame range that you want to bake it at, and then you can just click bake. All right, so let's go through a couple troubleshooting scenarios. RBC is rather unconventional. It's not like a traditional rigging tool. It does use rigid body physics, which can be complicated and frustrating at times. So I'll just go through a couple of scenarios to help you understand the structure better. So our rig is an armature rig set to rigid body objects. We can move it around in player simulation, but after player simulation, our model does not follow our rig because it is set to the rigid body objects, which are cached. So if you want to move your rig, it will have to be on the first frame where it is not cached. So just get comfortable with resetting to the first frame to move your rigs around. And also, and this is with most simulations, but just to let you know that if your playback is synced to either frame dropping or sync audio, it will not work. Blender needs to update every frame in order to cache. So make sure this is set as play every frame. Otherwise, your simulation will not work. But of course, that is only if you are still live caching. So you can save the cache here, and then you can switch over. So just make sure if you want to use one of these that your cache is recorded or saved. So another interesting question people had was where you have your set speed, it does not look like your wheel is rotating. This is called a rolling shutter effect. So that is the reason it looks like it's not spinning, but it actually is. Another issue is scale. Even after you rig, if you wanted to scale this up or down, you'll notice once you do and you press play, it shrinks back down to the original. That's because the armature mesh was scaled and not the actual rigid body objects, which is why you get this weird effect. So again, I'd recommend it to set your desired scale before rigging. So each vehicle has the same exact values, but they behave very differently. So this is why you want to best match your vehicle to the real world scale. And also note for the small, you see that our vehicle does not even work correctly, and that's because smaller rigid body objects are rather unstable at this moment. If you are wanting to create like an RC or a toy car animation, I recommend recording your rig to keyframes, and then you can scale down your vehicle to the desired size you want. Okay, so I think that's pretty much going to wrap everything up. Pretty sure I covered just about anything. Let me know if I didn't. If you do have more questions, I do have a manual you can check out, which will go over everything that's in RBC. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below. It's best if you join the Discord and then show me the issues that you're having or questions. The more visuals you can give me, or even the blend file works the best. I can figure out the issue a lot quicker that way. This was a long tutorial. I'm hoping to do maybe some shorter ones. So let me know down below if you want anything specific, or if you're wondering how to do something, go ahead and let me know and I'll see what I can do. But yeah, I think that's going to be it. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate you guys and your support, and go make something cool.